Hi, everybody. I'm Krista Cowan. I'm the corporate genealogist here at Ancestry. I've been with the company for about 21 years and in this particular role since 2011. And my primary role at Ancestry is family history education. So I love showing up here on Wednesdays with these virtual events to give you the education and information that you need in order to have a successful family history experience. So today specifically, we are talking about search tips and tricks on Ancestry. So we're going to walk through how to use those leaf hints, what to do to search from your tree, and then how to do database specific searches. And along the way, I'll throw in some of my favorite tips and tricks for getting successful searches and finding exactly what it is that you need to continue to make discoveries about your family history. So that's what we're going to cover today. We're going to do all of this kind of in context of the family tree. So you can use the search features on Ancestry without a tree. However, if you start with a tree, that is going to be most effective for you. So if you haven't yet started a family tree on Ancestry, I encourage you to go back and watch the Tree Building 101 video that I did several weeks ago. So you're going to go to ancestry.com/education, and that's where you're going to find that Tree Building 101 video. So if you're brand new to family history, that's the place to start. If you've taken a DNA test, and you haven't started a tree yet, you're going to want to go back to that tree building. But now we're going to talk about how to actually find records about your ancestors. Now, one of the questions that people ask is, why do I want records about my ancestors? Well, the records are where the story lives, and it's also how you connect the generations. So the stories of our ancestors' lives, understanding who they were as people, what their life experiences were, and then that second piece, which is being able to then continue to grow your family tree or go back another generation. The records are where you're going to make those connections that are going to make sure that you not only can you go back another generation, but that you're going back to the right people. You always want to make sure you're climbing your own family tree and not somebody else's. Okay, with that introduction, let's go ahead and I am going to share my screen and we are going to just take a quick look at my family tree. So this is my grandfather's. This is my family tree starting with my grandfather here. And you can see I have some holes here, like places where the family tree doesn't go back any further. I have some places where the tree goes back very far. And on almost all of these people, I have little green leaf hints. So Ancestry has more than 60 billion records, 65 billion now, 65 billion records from 88 countries around the world. We add an average of 3 to 5 million records a day to the site. And so one of the benefits of having your tree on Ancestry is that it allows you to have Ancestry do some of the heavy lifting for you. We look at the information you've entered in your tree and we go out and compare it against the records in our database. And if we find something we think matches, we will show that to you as a leaf hint. Now, we don't mean hint in the sense that we know the answer and we're guiding you on like a scavenger hunt. All we know is that a computer algorithm has looked at this information and we think this information matches what you have in your family tree. So you do still have to review that hint and make a decision about whether or not this information is for your person or if it just happens to be for some other person who has the same or a similar name, which means that the more information you know about yourself and your parents and your grandparents, the more likely you are to correctly identify your grandparents. And then the more you learn about them, the more likely you are to correctly identify their parents, and so on. So that's kind of the framework for building a family tree, is you always start with what you know, and then you move towards what you don't know. And you want to make sure you have a solid foundation to build on. Otherwise, it's really easy to end up off on a tangent. So this is my grandfather. I knew my grandfather. He was alive well into my adulthood. We had a close relationship. He shared with me information about his parents. I actually have vague memories of his mother, and I inherited her scrapbooks. So I know I'm building on a solid foundation with the information I have about my grandfather and his parents. And when I come to view the hints for each of these people, excuse me, I've got a little frog in my throat. When I come to view the hints for each of these people, it's going to lead me to records that I can review that tell me about who they were living with, things that I might not have already known about them. So for example, this 1950 census came up as a hint, and it's going to show me my great-grandparents. So let's just scroll till we find them on the image. Here are my great-grandparents. My great-grandmother was widowed by 1950. There is my grandfather's two sisters, Dorothy and Madeline, living in the household and a boarder. And so I always want to review that record to make sure that this record really is for the right family, living in the right place at the right time. And then it gives me clues, things like their ages and their birthplaces and their occupations, so that I know that I'm tracking down the right people. So that's the piece that you always want to pay attention to when you're reviewing those record hints. You always want to make sure that you're looking at the image wherever an image exists. Now, Ancestry gets images wherever possible. Sometimes we are only given an index. Sometimes we're given an image and we create the index. But if there's an image, you always want to view that image. The other thing that you want to do is, if you're working your way from yourself and your parents and your grandparents back in time, you want to kind of do a reverse chronological order review of the records. So I start with the 1950 census, and then I go to the 1940 census, and then I go to the 1930 census. Here in the United States, we take a census every 10 years on the zeros. 30, 20, 10, and so on. In Canada and in the UK, they take a census every 10 years on the ones, 1921, 1911, 1901, and so on. And that census framework is kind of the place to start. So review your census hints first. That's my advice to you, because it gives you a good framework to make sure that you've got the right family. So here's another census that I've reviewed in a hint for my grandfather's family. There's my grandfather. He's an 18-year-old kid in the household with his older 20-year-old sister, his younger 5-year-old sister, and his 52-year-old father and his 47-year-old mother, with their birthplaces and occupations and information listed. So again, that's what you're always looking for in those hints, are those census records first. Now, one of the things that sometimes happens is a record does not come up as a hint. So you should be able to find somebody every 10 years in the census. And you can see here from my great-grandmother's profile page, I have a 1900 census, I have a 1910 census, I have a 1930, 40, and 50 census, but there is no 1920 census. So Ancestry will give you hints if we have a high degree of confidence that this information matches what you've put in your tree. But if we don't have that level of confidence, then we won't show you that as a hint. And that is where you're going to have to search. So I'm going to have to go search for the 1920 census because it didn't come up as a hint. There are a couple of different ways to search, and we're going to start with the most basic first. Okay, so we're going to click search directly from the tree. So I'm on the profile page for my great-grandmother. Up here in the top right-hand corner, you're going to see the search button. I'm going to click that. It's going to take everything it knows about my great-grandma Lillian, and it's going to throw it at the search engine. And it's going to take just a second. Here we go. There we go. Okay. And it's going to search all of the searchable records on Ancestry, but it's going to filter out records I've already found. So I have a little filter here. that I can turn on or off. But because I've already found the 1900 and 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 censuses, it's not going to show me those in the search results. Okay. Scroll down, you're going to see it's going to show me things like newspaper clippings and photographs and city directories. Okay. I can filter this set of search results. And so I want you to think about what it is you're looking for. It's fun to just do a search and see what comes up, but it's more fun to think about what you're looking for and then be really intentional about how you search. So what we're going to do is, there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to use these filters over here on the left-hand side. If I know I'm looking for a census record, or if I know I'm looking specifically for a birth, marriage, or death record, I can filter directly to that kind of record and filter everything else out of the search results for now. And I think that that's a really smart way to search because it allows you to control what you're looking at any given time. And so I'm going to filter down to census records. And then one of the other things that I can do is I can browse by a specific collection. So I can click this little toggle button right here at the top right. I'm going to click that, and it's going to switch the search results from being a lot of information kind of in a ranked search order to showing me the specific databases of records. And if I know, for example, that I'm looking specifically for a 1920 census result, I can just click on that one database and only see results for that one database. So I'm going to encourage you to do that whenever you can, okay? So if you think about what records you should be able to find, look through your hints to go through and see what Ancestry is serving up to you, and then think about what's still missing that you need to go search for. Now, one of the questions that I'm sure is going to be asked, so I'll just answer it right now, is why would I have to search for a record? Why wouldn't it come up as a hint? And here's the primary reason why. Any record that's created has two particular points at which information can get confused. One is when the person is actually providing the information. In the case of a census taker would show up on the front porch and ask whoever was home to give them the information about who's in the household. And it might be the mom or the dad or the 13-year-old daughter who answered the question. Or if nobody was home and the census taker came back 3 times, nobody was home or nobody wanted to talk to him, he would ask the neighbors, "Can you tell me about the family that lives next door?" So think about your next door neighbors right now. How many of you could give their names and their ages and their birthplaces accurately? Right? So you think about the fact that the census taker is just writing down the information he's being told, either from a member of the household or from somebody in the community, and that's what gets recorded. So when the information then is written down, that's an opportunity for errors to creep in. Misspellings, inaccurate or incomplete information, okay? Then the second point at which information can sometimes get a little jumbled is when somebody is reading that record to create a searchable index. So somebody's looking at the image and typing the information in so that we can search it. And if that handwriting is super messy, or if that O looks like an E, or if the number is, you can't tell if it's a 4 or a 6, right? So those are the 2 points at which information can sometimes become jumbled. So when a computer algorithm is looking at the record and what you have in your tree and trying to compare them, sometimes it can't tell that this record really is for this person in your tree. And so it will not deliver a hint for you. So it's important to keep that in mind. That's true of census records. That's true of birth, marriage, and death records. Again, like somebody passes away, they ask a family member, sometimes it's the spouse, sometimes it's a child or a grandchild or a sibling. They ask, tell me information about the deceased so we can fill out this death certificate. Sometimes they give accurate information, sometimes they guess. Sometimes the handwriting is really lovely, sometimes it's a mess, and you can't read it when you go to index it. So keep that in mind when you're looking for records on Ancestry, and just know that's why you sometimes don't get hints. It means you're going to have to go search those records a little bit more intentionally in order to find what you're looking for. So my family is missing in the 1920 census, meaning I did not get a hint for that census. So that's why I have to go see if I can do a search to find them. Now, I don't expect that I will find them magically by just doing a search, because it didn't bring it up in the hint, which means I'm going to have to get a little bit tricky, okay? If you think about the way information is recorded, the single piece of information on a record that is most likely going to be incomplete or inaccurate is going to be the name. Names, think about all the nicknames people have, all the ways that you could abbreviate or put in initials, and then all the different ways that that name as it's written could get misinterpreted when it was being indexed. So one of the things that I will do is I will do what is called search iteration. So I've done a search from my tree, and now I'm going to try lots of different combinations of searches to see if I can find how it was recorded. In order to do that, I need to be familiar with the family. So I need to go back to the profile page and review the information. And so what you may have noticed here is that I used the multiple tabs so that I can have the tree information up in one tab and the search information up in another tab. And that allows me to kind of toggle back and forth between the two of them so that I don't get confused. So I've opened up my great-grandmother's profile page here, and I'm just going to review what I already know about the family. So here's what I know. I know that she got married in 1917 in Texas, and I know that she had her first child in 1920 in Little Rock, Arkansas. Now, that child was born in September of 1920, and the census was taken earlier in the year. So when the census was taken, she was pregnant, and she may have been living in Arkansas. She should be married, but you also have to remember that in 1920, the World War I had just ended, and the influenza pandemic was kind of winding down. And so there was a lot of displacement. I also happen to know that her husband was career military, and so it's very likely that they may have been in transit at the time that the census was taken. So I have to keep that in mind as well. If your family is living in one specific place and you know that and they never moved, that makes it so much easier. But when you have families who are mobile, finding them in the census gets a little bit trickier. So I'm going to come back over here to this search for the 1920 census. You can see over here on the left-hand side, I am just looking at 1920 census results, but I'm going to click on where it says more right here, and that's going to take me to the 1920 census database search page. So this allows me, rather than searching all 65 billion records on Ancestry at once, I'm going to search just this one census, okay? So you can do this for any database on Ancestry. There's more than 33,000 of them, and every database has its own unique search form. That's important because what it means is we know what information exists on the record, and so we're only going to give you those fields to search so that you can be more successful. Now, I happen to know that her last name at the time was Cowan. However, it's my last name. My last name gets misspelled all the time. C-O-W-A-N, C-O-W-E-N, C-O-W-I-N. I haven't seen it with a U, but it can happen, okay? So I'm going to use a wild card. Wild cards on Ancestry, there's two of them. One of them, and let me make this a little bigger so you can see it on your screen. One of them is a question mark, and a question mark replaces a single character. So that last vowel of my name that sometimes gets miswritten or misindexed, I'm just going to replace it with a question mark so that I can catch all of those variations. And you'll notice here I've marked this field exact. So I want only people with this last name with that last vowel as the variable. Now, my great-grandmother's name was Lillian. So I'm going to type in L-I-L. Now, Lillian, you think about all the different ways it could be nicknamed. Lily, Lil, right? So another wild card you can use on Ancestry in any search form is an asterisk. And an asterisk replaces any number of characters from 0 to N. Okay, so it could be Lily with two L's, Lily with one L, Lily with a Y, Lily with an I-E, Lillian with, right? Like think about all the different ways that her name could be spelled or nicknamed or misspelled. So L-I-L asterisk means it's going to catch all of those variables. And again, I'm going to mark that exact. And I'm going to go ahead and click search with nothing more than just a given name and a surname. And what I'm going to uncover when I do that is that there's only 133 women in the country whose name starts with L-I-L, last name is Cowan with a variable on that last vowel. Now, I may or may not want to go through all 133 search results. I certainly could. That's only a few pages. But I could also do what's called an iterative search. So I could come back over here to the little pencil on the left, and I can edit my search. I happen to know that my great-grandmother was born in Texas. Now, whoever took the census or answered the census takers' questions may or may not have known that, but I'm going to put it in and mark it exact and just see what happens. Now, remember, I know she was born in Dallas, Texas, but I'm not going to put Dallas, Texas into the search form because the census only records the name of the state or the country where the person was born. So if I put Dallas, Texas into that birth location field, even though I know that's where she lived or where she was born, I'm not going to get any search results because the census only lists the name of the state or the country. So another thing to think about when you're doing searches is what information exists on the record. And sometimes that means looking at a few records so that you understand that before you dive in and start searching for your people. So I'm going to put in Texas as the birthplace, and I'm going to click search again, and we're going to go from 133 search results down to what? 11. Okay, 11 search results is completely a manageable list of things to look for. Now, she was born in she was born in 1892, but the census didn't ask when people were born. The census asked, how old are you? And depending on when your birthday is and when the census was taken in the year, you might be a year older or a year younger than expected. Also, depending on who answered the census takers' questions, they may or may not have known how old you were, right? Oh, I think she's about X years old. That's what gets written down. That's what gets indexed. That's what becomes searchable. So you always have to kind of think about all of that, all of those kind of variables. So I know she was born in 1892. I know she should be married. She could be living in Arkansas. So I can quickly skim through these results and I can look at a couple of things. I can look at this birth year column over here. And I do have a couple of people born about the same time she was born. I could look at the name of the parent or spouse in this column right here, this in the middle of your screen. And I can see if she shows up there. And I can look at the way that the names are spelled to see, could one of those be her? Now, what I'm noticing is that I don't think any of these are her. None of the names, her husband's name is Frederick, and none of those names are coming up that look like Frederick. Some of these women are living with their parents, and I know she was not living with her parents at the time. Those who are listed with a relationship of wife, right? Again, Frederick is not the name of the husband. So that's the thing you have to keep in mind is sometimes you have to search and search and search and search. We call it researching, right? The idea is you have to kind of do iterative searching. So here's my biggest tip of all, and you're getting it in the first half hour of our time together, which is if the name is the single piece of information that is most often spelled incorrectly on the original record or indexed incorrectly on the transcription, maybe try searching without a name. So you can, when you edit this search, you can remove the name entirely. So for example, I can say, show me everybody born in about 1892, plus or minus a couple of years, just to account for that little swing of years in Texas, living in Arkansas, who is female. And I can click search and just see what happens. And that's what I want to empower you to do today. If you hear nothing else I say today as we play around with these search tips and tricks, it is that I want you to feel empowered to just play around with the search forms and see what happens. Because getting comfortable doing that is going to give you more success in finding what you're looking for than anything else. Now, before we end today, I am going to share with you one of the most powerful ways to do that. So be sure to stick around for that, but get used to playing with the search forms, whether it's the global search form that searches everything on Ancestry, which you find here under Search All Collections, or you find when you do a search from the tree, or whether it's a database specific search form like this 1920 search that we're doing right now. I just want you to feel like you can just play with it. You're not going to break anything doing lots of different kinds of searches. Okay, so I just did a search for all women born between 1890 and 1894 in Texas who are living in Arkansas. I got 1,767 search results. I'm not going to go through all of those. So I can now just start to play with this search form. For example, I happen to know that both of her parents were born in Prussia. Of course, by 1920, there was lots of variation around the place where she lived, and the borders were changing in Europe because of the war and whatnot. So I put in the names of her, or the birth locations of her parents, and now I only have 8 search results. And so I can quickly look through this list and see, does anything look like Lillian Cowan? It doesn't. If I change that to Prussia, does it change anything? Okay, do you see what I'm doing here? I'm just playing with the search results to see what comes up. And in some cases, I might get no search results, right? I knew that was going to happen. In some cases, there might be too many search results. And so the idea is just to kind of play around with the information in order to see what you can figure out. Now, if you ever get overwhelmed or think you're not quite sure what you've done, just click clear search. It'll start over from the beginning, and then you can plug in the information again. So I'm going to click that again. We're going to go 1892, Texas. We're going to mark that exact. I don't know that she's living in Arkansas. All I know is that 5 or 6 months later, she has a baby there. I could say, show me everybody whose last name starts with a C, who has a spouse whose first name starts with an F, right? You see what's happening? So play with the search forms when you can't find what you're looking for. And if you get too many search results, just come in and add another criteria that you think will help you narrow down what you're looking for. Okay. Now, I'm sure there's lots of questions about that. So let me just take a quick pause before I dive into my favorite tip. And I'm going to see if I've got some of our member services people that are answering your questions in the Q&A. And I'm just going to take a look and see if they've got any questions that they need me to answer live. There we go. Okay, lots of people apparently are asking about multiple tabs. So you see how I have multiple tabs open here. I've got the search results tab here. I've got the tree here. On a PC, anytime you use the right click button on your mouse, you will get the option to open things in a new tab, open link in new tab. And then you just click that and it will open that new tab. And so I do that all the time. Right click on the image, open it in a new tab. Okay. And so I just realized I stopped sharing my screen. Let me reshare my screen for you. There we go. Okay. So anytime you are viewing a record or an image, you can right click on it with your mouse and open it in a new tab. And now you'll see across the top of my screen here, I have those tabs, and now I can toggle back and forth between the index version of the record and the image version of the record. And I can kind of zoom in and out here. There you go. And then I can always get back over here to the person page so that I can review the information. So it's just right click, open a new tab. I'm not sure how to do that on a Mac. I think I'm not sure how to do that on Mac. Probably the same, I would imagine. Right click, open in new tab. If you are on a mobile device, you can usually long press and hold, and it will give you the option to open in a new tab. And so then you can kind of work your way through those results like that. Okay. Just want to make sure that I was answering the questions that you have. Okay, so we have not found my grandmother, my great-grandmother, or her husband in the 1920 census. And sometimes that happens. I am not giving up. It is more likely I just haven't found the right combination of how their information was entered than that they were skipped or missed. If they had stayed in one place, one of the little search tips that I can give you is try searching for the neighbors. So for example, here I have them in 1910 and I have them in 1930. And if they were living in the same place in those two censuses, I would look at the neighbors and then go search for some of those neighbors in 1920. And that might show me the page that has my great-grandparents on it. Now, in my case, they were living in very different places in those years. So that search strategy is not going to work, but it can work for a lot of you. Okay, my throat is not holding out. We had the RootsTech conference this last week, and I talked nonstop for 4 days. So that's why my voice is struggling just a little bit. Okay, so once you have looked at all of the hints for a person and then done a search from the tree to see if you can find what you're missing, and then done an additional database-specific search to see what you can find, the next step is to go and look to see what other records does Ancestry have that you might not have even considered. So when you're doing US research or Canadian research or UK research, the census is a great framework. Like I mentioned, it's the way to see who all is in the household. It's a way to get some basic information about them. It's kind of the starting point. The next step is to look for birth, marriage, and death records. However, every state and every country has different laws about when they started keeping birth, marriage, and death records and whether or not those records are public. So, my favorite resource on the entire Ancestry website is the card catalog. And the card catalog is found under the search menu. And we're going to open up that card catalog. And what this is it's a listing of all 33,753, as of today, databases of records on Ancestry. So I can simply come in here and I can say, I want to see Arkansas. And I'm going to click search, and it's going to show me that out of all 33,000 databases on Ancestry, 67 of them are specific to the state of Arkansas. I can then filter down to a particular type of record. So let's say I'm interested in birth records. And it looks like only 2 of those databases are birth records, and those birth records only go from 1914 to 1922. Probably because Arkansas started keeping birth records in 1914, and they likely have a 100-year privacy law on those birth records, which means Ancestry's only acquired records through 1922. Sometime in the next few years, we may gain subsequent years. So if I have family members who were born in Arkansas, and I do, in the 1860s or 70s or 80s, there are no birth certificates available on Ancestry for that time period. So it doesn't matter how much I search and search and search, I'm never going to find a birth record because it doesn't exist on the site, and it may not exist at all. Now, there's a million other places to find birth information, including ages on censuses and ages on marriage records, sometimes birth dates on marriage records, sometimes birth dates on death certificates or in obituaries. Lots of places to find the birth information, but you're not going to find a birth certificate. And so this is my favorite thing because I don't want to waste my time, and I don't want you wasting your time looking for records that might not exist. Censuses every 10 years, birth, marriage, and death records, different for every state and every country. And you can just do this. You can just type in the name of any state or country, and Ancestry will show you exactly what we have for that location. In this case, if I type in England births, right, England, and I'm filtered to births, it's going to show me that there's 222 databases. So maybe I need to get a little bit more specific about the particular county in England where I'm interested in finding those particular birth records. Now, another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about birth, marriage, and death records specifically, which is this. Every state and country has different laws, but that is what we call civil registration. So birth, marriage, and death records kept by the government are called civil registration. In many of those same times and places, there were also church records. And depending on the denomination, the churches kept track of things like baptisms, marriages, and burials. So baptisms of children often include not just the christening date, but also the birth date. Marriages, whether they're performed civilly or religiously, are going to be recorded. And then burials are often recorded in church records because the burial takes place many times in history in the church yard, the graveyard connected to the church. The burial record often then includes the death date as well. So think about where you can find the information that you're looking for, and your searches are going to be more successful. So that is kind of the trick to using the card catalog, is to think about the records that you need to answer the question that you have, and then look to see if Ancestry even has the record so that you can then search that specific database. Now, in this case, once I find a database of interest, so Lancashire, England church parish registers dating back to 1545, that's going to take me to the database specific page. And that's where you're going to want to stay focused if you're doing a database specific search, is on that page. So instead of searching all 65 billion records on the site, search just the record collection that has the records of interest. So here's another place where I want you to play around. Every one of you at some point today or tomorrow, or when you're watching this video or rewatching this video, I want you to come into the search, go to the card catalog, and play around with just typing in the name of a country or a state. And that's going to show you the list of records that Ancestry has for that place. Then you're going to filter by the kind of record, and then go look at the particular database. So one of the newest databases on Ancestry, and you know it's new because it has this little new tag over here, That means Ancestry has published this record collection within the last 90 days. Every time you find a new record collection of interest, when you get to the database specific search page, what I want to encourage you to do is scroll down past the search boxes and look at two things. One is the source information. So this is going to tell you where Ancestry obtained these records from. That's who the original record owners are. In this case, it's the Municipal Archives for the City of New York. Then you're going to scroll down past that and look at the second thing, which is what we call the database description. So the database description is going to show you what you need to know about these records in order to A, make the most use of them, B, search them the most effectively, and C, understand exactly what these records are telling you when you find a record that pertains to your family. Oftentimes, it will also tell you what to do next, what other records they have, what other information you can find, and where you can find that information. So I strongly encourage you to read these database descriptions every time you look at a new database for the first time. Okay? Okay. So let's just do a quick review, and then I will check and see if there are any additional questions. When you are in your tree, you're going to review your hints. Sometimes you're going to accept them. Sometimes you're going to reject them because they're not for your person. Then you're going to do a search from the tree to see what bubbles up to the top of the list that hints might have missed. You're going to use those filters in order to look for a specific kind of record that you might be missing in the timeline of that person's life. Then, if you know you're missing a specific record, you are going to go to that database and search just that database, starting with censuses, then moving on to birth, marriage, and death records. If you need to know if Ancestry has a record for a particular time and place, you're going to go to the card catalog and you're going to see by the name of the state or the country, does Ancestry have birth, marriage, or death records for that particular time and place? And if we do, go to the database to search it for your family members. You can use wildcards in your searching. So a question mark replaces a single character, and an asterisk replaces multiple characters. And that's how you're going to play around with different variations for names specifically. On any search form, you can mark fields exact, or you can mark them with date ranges or proximity to specific places. And I want you to get comfortable playing around with those different search parameters so that you can have more success in finding what it is that you're looking for. Okay, so that is, those are my best tips, right? And that is how I do all of my searching, is through that process of iterative searching and getting super creative with how I use the filters and the wildcards. Now, here's what I'd like you to comment on in the chat. So make sure you put it in the chat, not in the Q&A, but I would love to know if you have something in your tree that you have not been able to find yet. Okay, so what is it that you're looking for? Is it a brick wall that you're stuck on? Is it a specific record type that you struggle with? Is it like, what is it that you're looking for? So I'm paying attention here. And can you get really specific? So some of you are looking for birth certificates. And again, let me just remind you, not all places have birth certificates. Here in the United States, many states did not start keeping birth certificates at a state level until the 1920s or 30s or even the 1940s in some places. So birth certificates may not exist, which means you have to think about what other records might have the birth information on it. That's a really important piece of this process, okay? Let's see, some of you are looking for marriage certificates. So marriage records are kept probably the most consistently through time and the earliest in time. So that there's more likelihood of finding those. And so you just need to see if the records exist. Let's see what else we've got here. Ireland. So many of you are looking for records from Ireland. It's so funny. I had lots of conversations at Roots Tech last week with people who that's their brick wall, and it's one of mine too. Irish records. The challenge is this: Ireland had a civil war, and in 1922, the records office was bombed, and most of the countrywide records were destroyed in Ireland. So, in order to have success with Irish research, you need to know where in Ireland your family was from, because the records you're going to use are going to be at a county or sometimes even a town level. That's an important thing to keep in mind. Some of you are looking for records from across the pond, right? I'm not sure where you're at, but across the pond for me means I'm looking for records in Germany and in Ireland and in England. Search the card catalog for those country names. Regardless of what subscription you have on Ancestry, you can search the card catalog, and we will show you if the records exist on the site. So get used to playing with that a little bit. For those of you who are looking for death records, so again, different states and countries started keeping death certificates at different periods of time. So you're going to want to check the card catalog to see if the records exist. And then if the death certificate doesn't exist, think about other places where death information is recorded: on a tombstone, in an obituary, in a pension file, right? Lots of other places where that death information might be recorded. Some of you are looking still for specific family members in specific censuses. And so hopefully some of the little tips I've shared with you today, go back to that 1930 census or that 1939 register. Go back to that specific database and try some of these search tips to see if you can find some of those things. Okay, a couple of you, actually several of you, are looking for immigration records. I could do a whole class on immigration records, and I probably should, because immigration records, more than any other record I've ever seen, are the ones that have the most common misspellings and misinterpretation of information, which means they get indexed in ways that we wouldn't expect. And so it means we have to get the most creative with some of our search parameters and those wild cards. Also, passenger lists, immigration records actually don't exist for all times and all places. So we have to think about other kinds of records that will give us information about a person's immigration. Citizenship records or naturalization records are going to be useful. Newspapers sometimes printed lists of passengers on ships that came in. So lots of different ways that you can find information about a person's immigration that don't always include specifically a passenger list. Some of you are looking for people who came to the United States and then went back to a country, back to Italy or back to Germany. You know what? Here's the truth. The US didn't keep track of who left. We only kept track of who came in. And so that's one of those circumstances where the record that you're looking for might not even exist. So think about, you have to kind of think about that. Several of you are asking questions about Native American records. So on Ancestry actually has the largest online collection of Indigenous American records anywhere. And so if you just go into the card catalog and type in either Native American, you'll see a list of databases. There are also records specific to tribes. So the Cherokee, the Choctaw, I'm trying to remember what the 5 civilized tribes are. That was the phrase that was used historically to talk about the tribes that were forcibly resettled to Oklahoma and that area. We've got a lot of records for those. There are the Dawes rolls and the Baker's rolls. And so lots of records on Ancestry for some of those Native American tribes. Explore the card catalog. You're going to find a lot of information about that. Now, a couple of you are asking questions about all the spelling variations that are possible for your name. So I'm going to give you one last little tip, and I think it's a useful exercise for all of you. I want you to look at, pick a surname in your tree. The surname I'm looking at in the chat right now is Schaefer, right? But pick a surname in your tree, and I want you to just go through the exercise of writing, and do it with pen and paper, and you'll understand why in a second. I want you to go through and I want you to just brainstorm and write out all the different ways that that name could be spelled. In the case of Schaefer, right? Schafer, Schafer, Schaefer, like all the different ways that it can be spelled. And then once you've done that, I want you to look back through that. And I want you to tell me if you were writing it fast or sloppy, how some of those letters could get misinterpreted. So it's not just about all the different spelling variations. It's also about the fact that, have you ever seen an S, like a handwritten cursive S? Sometimes it looks like an L. So maybe somebody thought the name was Leifer, right? Not Schaefer. So think about that as well. That H can sometimes look like a K, depending on how the handwriting is done. So the exercise of going through and doing all the variations with handwriting of how a name is spelled and how it might be misinterpreted is going to really get your brain churning about different ways you can search for that surname in order to find it. It also means that if you do a no-name search in any of the search forms on Ancestry, when you're looking at the list of search results, you'll be more likely to recognize the misspelling or the mistranscription of that particular name. Okay, those are my best search tips and tricks, folks. I hope that that's helpful. Understanding kind of how the search system works on Ancestry and all the different ways that you can utilize it to really dig into those records and find what it is you're looking for. But even kind of before that, making sure that what you're looking for exists. Please, 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 if you would, in the chat, just leave, if you haven't already, one comment about something new you learned today that you're going to go and try. I love not only reading through what it is that was an aha moment for you, but I also think it's really beneficial for you to type it out because it helps you to remember it, and it means you're more likely to go try it. So if you would leave that comment before you go, that's all I have for you today. Please go check out ancestry.com/education. You'll see the upcoming virtual events that we have planned for future Wednesdays, and I hope you'll join me again. Until next time, I'm Krista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.